Dobre páni, sme tu, ideme to teda rázne prúdiť. Je 1.12.2024, začíname 18.47, piču sa majú 17.47, každému podľa jeho gusta. Dneska máme 376. relaxačný tréningový deň. Je nedeľa, takže najťažší deň, dávajú sa zhybožruty aj klikožruty, ale iba samozrejme 3 série, to znamená 15, 15, 14, 14, 13, 13 zhybožrutov, predné, zadné, zadné, predné a predné, zadné, 100, 90 a 80 klikožrutov. A sme vybavení, dobre? Skontrolujeme, či sa je zvuková stopa, lebo zvykne robiť po problémy, zvykne nesedieť. Dobre páni, sme tu, ideme do prvého razu prúdiť, je 1.12.2024, začíname 18.47, piču sa majú 17.47, každému podľa jeho gusta. Dobre. Takže všetko sedí, zvuk sedí. Pustíme pičusko ako podmas. Dáva rady chorým hajzlom, ľudským odpadovým vredom. Takže nech kľudne dáva rady tým hajzlom. My si tiež vypočujeme jej rady pre analfabetov. Poďme na to.
Recharge, while someone in the bottom left of the tree might want to potentially go block or life regen or armor and mostly focus on those things. You could potentially be a bottom left tree and get energy shield, but that's honestly not going to really be ideal, as you're either not going to be able to get enough nodes to really scale your energy shield while picking up eventually physical or melee nodes in bottom left, and you might have been better off just simply focusing on what is available to you in your part of the tree. Some examples of this being a melee build at the bottom left are most likely going to want to focus on armor, leech, regeneration, and eventually block. Builds in the top of the tree are mostly going to want to focus on energy shield regen, energy shield leech, while builds in the bottom right might focus on something like life and evasion rating. There's a little bit of play, and there are some interesting mechanics between each of these three general areas of the tree. For example, the top left of the tree has a mix of both armor, block, and energy shield nodes, allowing you to mix and match a little bit. And it might be worth it in some cases to go a little bit of a hybrid setup. For example, a monk that might go both energy shield and evasion at the same time, as a lot of nodes in their area of the tree are going to allow you to synergize like that. No matter what you play, another very important thing to keep in mind is that you need some sort of recovery in your build. You might be able to have quite a lot of things that either allow you to take big hits at once or make you pretty tanky. But no matter what, you're going to have to heal back up once you do get hit. There's going to be three main ways for you to achieve this. Now, there's going to be a few other niche ways of getting your recovery back. But in general, most builds are either going to want to focus on regen, leech, or recharge. Recharge is mostly going to be something for energy shield at the top of the tree. But if you're somewhere in the top left of the tree, you could potentially also focus on energy shield recharge as a life build and play something like Eternal Youth, for example. Someone in the bottom left of the tree might instead want to focus on regen and leech instead. And I wouldn't necessarily try to focus on only one of them. It's typically pretty good to get two of the three ways of recovering rather than just simply relying on one. An example of this would be if you're only focusing on leech and you're in an area with a bunch of debuffs on the ground that do damage to you, but you have nothing to hit, your leech doesn't really do anything. And as you're walking over a bunch of fire on the ground, you're just going to quickly die. If you had a little bit of regen at the same time, the ground dots would still hurt you, but you'd be able to recover some of it with your regen as you walk through it until you find something to hit or until you're out of them until your regen brings you back up. Moving on to gear. Now, this is going to be fairly simplistic for most builds, but just as we talked about for the passive tree, how you want to focus on something that makes sense in your area, the gear is also going to have different defensive layers on them that can synergize with what you're doing. For example, if you're playing a top build where you want to get a lot of energy shield, you are going to want to use as much energy shield gear as possible to further make your energy shield be higher. If you're playing a bottom left build where you're getting a lot of armor nodes, you're going to want a bunch of armor gear to further multiply the total amount of armor that you have. For the stats you're going to want to actually find on the gear itself, the general advice for pretty much all builds in the game is to just find yourself gear with life and resistances on it. That is pretty much the big backbone of every single build, where you need to be res capped and you want to find as much life as possible to increase your health pool as much as you can. There's plenty of other really useful mods that are going to spawn on gear that are going to potentially either be really important for your build or completely useless. But no matter what, a good piece of gear in PoE has always been something with life and resistances on it. Obviously, if you're playing an energy shield build, for example, then instead of wanting life and resistances, you'd want energy shield and resistances. As long as you keep that in mind and you try to upgrade whatever piece of gear you have with more piece of gear to have life and resistances, you should have a pretty easy time. To further add on to this, a new system that's going to be included for gear are going to be runes. Runes are going to be items that you're going to presumably find very often as you're killing enemies, which will then go into sockets in your gear that will give you stats based off of the rune type and based off of where it's equipped. This could be a great source of resistances if you are, for example, putting cold resistance off of hitting the cap of 75, or you can fit one or two cold res runes into your builds to pretty much completely fix any sort of cold res issues you have. These runes are going to have quite a lot of different stats on them, so it'll be easy for you to mix and match them for whatever you need. And between this and using any sort of crafting currency that comes along your way, such as exalted orbs, which are going to be super plentiful and easy for you to just use on your gear willy-nilly to get some free stats, you shouldn't have too much of an issue progressing through the campaign into the
To sú
end.
rady
That's pretty
prepičujú
much
sa, to
everything
sú
for
rady
this
prepičujú sa.
video. If you have any further questions or want any further explanation on anything that we talked in here, feel free to leave a comment in the comments below, and I'd be more than happy to help you with any questions. I also stream on Twitch every single day, so feel free to come by Twitch and ask me your questions there, or if you simply want to come and hang out with all the cuties, I'd be more than happy to see you there as a part of our community.
Chcem
That said, I'm
ísť
super excited
do
about this
komunity
episode coming out in a few days. Hope to see you
ľudských
all
hnojov.
for the next video.
To je to, po čom túžim. Grupovať sa s ľudskými odpadnutými chujmi. S ľudskými bastardmi. S ľudskou hnilobou, ľudskou rasou. To je to, po čom túžim. Byť v spoločnosti ľudskej hniloby. Tu sa zase tí pičisovia. O 6 dní to začína a aj tak nechce ukázať nič z toho, tí kokoti. Tupí bastardi, choj. Hajzle. Posledný pápajovec. Posledného pápajovca. Prežil masaker na osud naivníkov. Pápajovci. 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 Čo je armor break? Vypočujeme si tohto pičisa chorého, čo bude hovoriť.
I'm going to be playing the physical damage crossbow mercenary. What is up, YouTube? And this is Aeroplane, and in my previous video I covered a complete analysis of the Witch Hunter Ascendancy, which I'll be starting with as it looks absolutely amazing. I've come up with, in my opinion, a build archetype not yet talked about through the various mercenary videos that I've seen, and it is the physical damage archetype of the Crossbow Witch Hunter.
Vieš, či budeme odsýpať? Monka, ktorý má minionov. Monk, plno skeletonov a možno nejaké zombie k tomu prihodím, pokiaľ budú funkčné. Ja budem odsýpať Monka, ktorý má tučných skeletonov. To budem odsýpať ja. Ale znova, každému podľa jeho gusta. Pokračuj.
Ascendancy. First and foremost, why physical damage? Historically in PoE 1, most builds approach scaling of damage of physical attacks or spells through two main ways. Firstly, for spells as an example, it is going to be through the use of conversion, like in the Shockwave Totem build, where you convert physical spell damage to cold, and a Fireblade Vortex, for example, through Ritual League, where you apply fire damage on a Blade Vortex build. Secondly, ever since the introduction of the Inversion Elemental Mastery, tri-elemental attack builds have been extremely popular and the meta staple for any attack build. This is going to be for claws, for bows, and only until the ultimate endgame where there are Mirror Fist bows or claws, and fully converting the damage into one specific element and penetrating through that. Once again, that is still back to the first example. In Path of Exile 2, the above methods are no longer as good as they seem, and here are 7 reasons why. Number 1, conversion no longer respects origin, which means that if you convert damage from one type to another, from physical to cold, your increases and gains as extra no longer applies to the original damage which was converted away from. In this case, physical to cold, for example, it's no longer going to apply to the physical portion of it. And because of this, there's no longer this double dipping with, for example, spell damage or gain S on the physical component, and Dreamcore has a video fully covering this, and I'll drop a link in the description. Inversion in Path of Exile 1 existed as an elemental mastery, and so far we have not seen this existing in Path of Exile 2, but this is something that we have to wait and see. And this is the sole reason why tri-elemental builds became the meta. Elemental penetration no longer goes below 0, putting it on par with monster physical damage reduction, which historically in Path of Exile 1 could only go to 0, and that is why elemental builds are generally much more favored over physical variants, because sources of Crush and Overwhelm can only reduce the physical mitigation to 0. And with that no longer being the case, there is no longer a strong reason why elemental should be the go-to approach when it comes to converting physical attacks or spells. Number 4, Armor Break is introduced, which I'm speculating can potentially reduce the enemy's physical mitigation to 0. I'll cover a little bit more later on with a full analysis of Armor Break. Explode on Witch Hunter Ascendancy is physical, which should also scale with the physical debuffs applied to the enemy, as well as other sources of increased physical damage scalers in our build, which we don't convert. And because of this, we're able to scale our clear through the Explode of Witch Hunter, which should be affected through all the other methods that we are scaling. Number 6. Conversion requires investment, and that is through 3 main methods: affixes on gear, passive points on tree, or skill gems to be able to fully convert, and achieving the main benefits of elemental conversion through resistance reduction and penetration is no longer a huge boon, as we have talked about earlier. Lastly, we've seen how important life recovery is in Path of Exile 2, and through a very medium core game where you can break your maps on your atlas and dying is fairly detrimental, single life loss will be a problem through very prolonged boss encounters. And so far, all sources of life leech have been teased to be physical damage leech from glove affixes or through leech through skill gems. I've currently not seen many other ways of leeching from elemental sources, if I've seen any at all, and here are just some examples of how you can leech. All that being said, I hope that's a compelling enough reason why I'll be going the physical damage archetype and why maybe you should try it out. Next up, I'll be covering more into my analysis of Armor Break, which has not had much discourse yet. And here are some theories that I've come up with. Every monster has an arbitrary armor value. Jonathan has mentioned that there are heavily armored monsters in one of the videos, and in one example, a boss has around 2,300 armor broken before it has the armor break debuff applied to it. In another example, this white mob here has its armor instantly broken when hit, which shows a variation in the amount of armor across the different types of monsters. Secondly, the armor break debuff reduces physical damage mitigation of monsters from whatever value they have to 0. And that is a complete theory on my part, and assuming that the scaling of armor follows the same way as Path of Exile 1, the graph will be an exponential scaling number as we reduce its armor. Upon the trigger of the armor break, as the third point, enemies have 0 physical mitigation, and this assumes no inherent physical damage reduction through his Path of Exile 1, things like increased PDR or endurance charges. And what we have seen so far, which are proven, is going to be that armor break is duration based. We have seen the newly leaked Atlas passive notables, which show that we can increase the armor break duration, and that is proving that it is duration based. And the fifth is going to be that armor break is not consumed by high velocity round if the armor is not broken, which we have seen in this video. With all that being said, the following is going to be how I'll be approaching my first character, and that's the physical variant of the crossbow for the Witch Hunter on launch. Before I jump into it, I just want to add a few disclaimers that firstly, we have not seen any build enabling uniques. We have not seen all the available uniques, the hundreds of uniques available, and this could create a build which is build defining. And until we see those, we are going to stick to what we have got and we'll pivot where necessary. Secondly, the passes on the tree could enable special archetypes. There are a lot of passive released, but not all of them have been released yet, so we'll have to see. And lastly, skill gems play a huge role in skill combinations, and we have not seen the reveal of the damage numbers, the damage types of ballistas, and some of the crossbow, lightning crossbow archetypes yet. With that out of the way, let's jump into the skill combinations and weapon swaps that could maximize our damage, and that's going to be as follows. For clear, I imagine that we'll be applying armor break through the use of armor piercing rounds. And for single target, that's where we'll be using a mixture of grenades as well as high velocity rounds to...
Dobre. 376. tréningový deň s nami. No. 376. relaxačný tréningový deň je za nami. Bolo 1.12.2024, skončili sme 19.05. Pičuse majú 18.05, každému podľa gusta. 376 je za nami. Skončili sme 19.05. Segment trval 18 minút a 50 sekúnd. Dobre?